Happy New York Friday. This is the Let's Go Mets podcast. I am your host, Sam Wu, talking about your New York Mets. You can watch us on Facebook Live, Twitter, Periscope, YouTube Live, and Twitch, and also simulcasting on the Primetime Radio Network. Today's episode 8, we're going to be talking about DH coming to the National League. This podcast is titled DH or Not to DH. But I got to tell you something. Mets fans' reactions has been very mixed about it, even though analysts have been saying that the 2020 Mets would have the advantage. But right now, we're going to talk to a special guest, a dear friend of mine from the past. He writes for the Orange County Register and is the author of the 50 greatest Dodger games of all time. Now, look, Mets fans, don't hold it against them. There are Dodgers fans before the Mets time. So your grandfather, your grandmother may like it, but that's okay. On the Nova Product Design Hotline, we have J.P Hoornstra. J.P., welcome to the Let's Go Mets podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing good, although I got to say, Sam, I feel like I just wasted $5 on this Nitro Cold Brew because that was the shot of caffeine I needed, that intro you just gave.
Thanks. I actually practiced it for a total of 2 minutes, and I just didn't want to disappoint you for coming on to this up-and-coming Let's Go Mets podcast. But thank you. Thank you very much. So JP, this is funny because back in January, you were already talking about this in one of your articles, which I'm going to post the link right now in all of our social media pages. And the title of your article was "Baseball's Designated Hitter Rule Could Benefit from Compromise." So you were already ahead of the curve before that, and the one line you start off in the article like this, and I'm going to read this verbatim. Think the designated hitter is coming to the National League, and it said, quote, "The suggestion often made that the pitcher be denied a chance to bat and a substitute player sent up to hit every time has been brought to life again and will come up for consideration when the American and National League committees on the rules get together." Those words were printed in 1906. So my first question to you is, where did you find that? How'd you find that?
It's a good question. I think I was digging because I knew vaguely that the designated hitter was not a new idea, even when it was ratified by the American League in 1973. I knew it had been around for decades, but I didn't quite know how old. Somebody somewhere had cited that article as, if not the earliest evidence of the DH being talked about in Major League Baseball. It was the earliest known evidence. It was the earliest anybody could find. And even, like you mentioned, like that article from 1906 alludes to it having been around for many years before. So somebody somewhere out there probably has an earlier article that I just couldn't find.
Wow. Because I was actually like that was like you talked about my intro. That was a heck of an intro to an article, because once I saw in 1906, they were talking about this before my grandfather was born. I mean, that's crazy. Right? And it's still a debate. And as we come into 2020, if there is a time that Major League Baseball, the National League, institutes the designated hitter, aside from interleague play, it's probably now. Would you agree?
It's a good question. It's so complicated. I think the longer answer, the short answer is this: if you had told me, 30 years ago, that it would be another 30 years before something changed on this, I would have said you were crazy, because when I was growing up, the designated hitter had already been established in one league, rejected by the other, and it just seemed like inertia was going to keep it there. I don't know what would have changed And I still don't know what changed to make this the time, except from a labor negotiating perspective, where the union and the league are already talking quite a bit right now. There aren't any games to play, so their primary distraction is not there. They have nothing if not time to talk about things like the designated hitter, which they've been talking about, bringing that to the National League. I guess from that standpoint, it makes sense. But I think when you talk about, if I were to ask the commissioner why now, he would probably say, well, I've been looking at this time of game thing for a while. If you eliminate the need for mid-inning pitching changes that you see in the National League because there is no designated hitter, the need for substituting pinch hitters, the American League game on average was 2 minutes shorter than the NL game last year. Boom, I can get 2 minutes right there, and now's the time for that. And if I were to ask the players union, they would say, well, we've always been in favor of adding new jobs for hitters or for pitchers, but this adds a job for a hitter in 15 of the 30 teams. Let's do it. Okay. But having said that, those issues existed 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I think the only reason they're doing it now is because they have time to talk.
This is my feelings on it. As a Mets fan, I've always loved the pitcher hitting, especially when Bartolo Colon hits that home run. If there was that DH rule in the National League, that would have never happened. Or Jacob deGrom, or Noah Syndergaard, and even Steven Let's Go Matz hitting home runs. Like, I love it when pitchers hit, believe it or not, because anything could happen, and you're always rooting for the underdog to get on base, as a pitcher. So that, for me, it's like that element's taken out if they switch to the DH permanently. But then again, talk to the Seattle Mariners. Edgar Martinez, the ultimate DH hitter. Beautiful. Like, they would have missed out on a lot of that of his career, being the DH and all those big hits in those moments. So you can make the argument on both sides. And right now, and I'm going to go to your three options that you had, and we're going to talk about that right now, I'm willing to have a little bit of a compromise to it, because I just don't want to see it completely, leave the game, the pitcher's hitting. But at the same time, it's kind of cool to have a DH when you have like a Robinson Cano or a Cespedes that could definitely benefit from that.
Yeah, and I think the Mets, when you talk about Cano and Cespedes, you could have kind of your lefty righty DH, and they would benefit from that setup. I can see the Dodgers doing something like that. I think they're set up nicely to do that, but I think a lot of NL teams aren't. I think the two teams that you and I follow are respectively in pretty good position. I think a lot of NL teams would be scraping, and I think in the vein of what I was saying earlier, if you were to ask any National League general manager right now, I think the Mets, I think Brody Van Wagenen and Andrew Friedman would say, yeah, sign me up. And I think a lot of them would say, where was this news? Where was this memo last October? Because then I would have had a whole offseason to prepare to go out and get a DH, go out and find the next Edgar Martinez for my team. Now I don't have one.
So you wrote three options. Option number one, to not completely take out the pitcher and also still have the DH, the compromise. Let the home manager decide whether the DH is in effect on a game-by-game basis. So I like that idea. Tell me a little bit more about that idea.
Right. Well, I think the main reason that I am going to miss pitchers batting for themselves, aside from the occasional Bartolo Colon home run, is that I think baseball needs more strategy that the average fan can see, not less. There's a lot of strategy in baseball that it takes somebody who's been a fan for months or years to appreciate. Whether the manager should go to his bullpen, go to his bench, pull his starting pitcher out, is something that's pretty obvious even to the novice fan. If you've never watched a game of baseball before, Sam, I could explain to you what's at stake here with the manager either taking out his starting pitcher or pinch hitting for his starting pitcher. Those kind of things that you don't always see in the American League, and you would understand it right away. I think baseball needs more of those kinds of strategies to pull in more fans. And this is one way to reintroduce that. If you're going to take away the DH, if you're going to take away the opportunity, or if you're going to take away the opportunity for National League pitchers to bat for themselves, let's at least add in a layer of strategy that the average fan can see. And look, think about the last 5 years. We've seen a lot of two-way players gain acceptance by major league teams. Shohei Ohtani, probably the most obvious, but Michael Lorenzen on the Reds, that guy can hit. This guy's a really good hitter, and he's one of their 8 best relief pitchers. Brendan McKay, the Tampa Bay Rays used their first-round pick a couple years ago on a two-way player. This is the way that the game is going. I don't know what their future is in a world without pitchers batting for themselves, but if you let the manager say, hey, I've got Brendan McKay on my roster, let's use the DH today. Or I've got Shohei Ohtani on my roster, let him hit for himself. I think that is the kind of thing that could really give an advantage for guys who can do both, who can pitch and hit, and for managers who are smart enough to know how to use their players.
That's a great point. That's a really good point. I mean, I like how you kind of exploit the players' all-around talent with Ohtani. I forgot about him. And, I like that first option, but I'm going to expand on it. Tell me your opinion. I like the idea, let the home manager decide whether the DH is in effect on a game-by-game basis. But how about a little twist to it? How about whichever team has the better record, their manager gets to pick? Now, one would ask, well, what if the opening day, what do you do? Then that idea just, went to, well, how about the home manager, decides when they're as a tiebreaker? Something like that.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, I think it would, on a superficial level, give teams more incentive to win, which has been a problem in baseball. If you look at the disparity in records between the best and the worst teams, only getting larger. I think that's more because the general managers are aiming for a high draft pick or trying to avoid paying luxury taxes than the players on the field aren't trying to win. So I like the spirit of it. I don't know if it would affect that kind of change. I think the other thing too, though, is that there would be a tangible advantage to playing at home. Not to say that there aren't any already, but this would be one more. I don't know. I like your idea. I think we could experiment with it.
Yeah. No, you made a great point about that. The advantage of being at home, right, versus being in a certain league at their home. I like it. And especially when, right now this could potentially be an 80-something game season and less travel and mixing up the leagues. I see all the rumors. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not going to speculate. Hey, I like that. I definitely like that. And option number 2, I actually liked, allow the DH to stay in the game as long as the starting pitcher remains in the game. So tell me about that, JP. How would that work?
Sure. Well, you still see a National League game, generally speaking, from the 6th inning on, 5th or 6th inning on. For the first 5 innings, you see an American League game. It's really kind of the ultimate hybrid example. But let's face it, most pitchers aren't good hitters, and and yet they only have to bat 2 or 3 times a game. But a lot of times you see them get pulled for a pinch hitter because the situation calls for a better hitter than the starting pitcher. Well, this kind of eliminates that. You could let the pitcher pitch as long as he's throwing well. Mm-hmm. But he just wouldn't have to bat for himself. And then when the pitcher's, really removed for genuine reasons, other than the fact that it's his turn to bat. If the guy's struggling to get batters out, then you put in a relief pitcher. And then when his turn comes up to bat the next time, you could just substitute your best pinch hitter off the bench. And then it becomes what you've typically seen from National League games to this point. It would just be an American League game for the first however many innings the starter goes. And if you're the kind of fan who says, man, starting pitchers don't throw as long as they did when I was coming up, you're not wrong. But this would kind of do something to counteract the fact that starting pitchers are getting removed earlier than ever.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking at option number 3 right now as we're jumping ahead, JP. I just want to ask people watching in, what do you think? To DH or not to DH? Put on your comment and below, and we'd like to hear from you. But option number 3, JP, mandate that starting pitchers bat for themselves, then allow managers to insert a DH once the starter is removed from the game. So that's completely opposite of option 2. How is that different? Change the game.
Yeah, that would be an interesting one. I think that kind of like how I was saying with the idea that we have all of these exciting two-way players who are coming into baseball, and if there's a designated hitter in both leagues, you're really neutralizing their greatest skill. One of the other things that we've seen in the last 5 years is the use of openers, pitchers who throw 1 or 2 innings and then they're out of the game. And I think that in the spirit of adding a layer of strategy, is something I wouldn't want to see taken away, which if you are reading option 2, where the DH is in only as long as the starting pitcher is in, well, why would you ever use an opener? Your DH would be gone as soon as that opener is out after the first or second inning. He'd probably never get to bat. So this would be sort of the opposite of that. It would allow openers to proliferate, maybe even more. It would be a different kind of game, and I'm not quite as sure about how sort of the secondary and tertiary effects would play out. But in the spirit of speeding the game up, if that's your thing, I mean, forget double switches late in the game. You wouldn't have to worry about that. Maybe your Edgar Martinez wouldn't be in the starting lineup, but he'd be waiting there on the bench. And you could strategically get him in there at a particular time when you're thinking, you know what? I don't want my starting pitcher anymore. I want my Edgar Martinez taking his at-bats for the remainder of this 9-inning game. Let's get him in there.
Well, after reading option 3, I'll tell you what, last summer, the summer of Edwin Diaz and the heartbreak that Mets fans had, that I was actually saying to myself, you know what? Instead of going through like 8 innings as a Mets fan, of course, SNY in New York would hate that because, of course, the Mets always had the lead. And then when Diaz came in, probably about 17 to 20 times, the game's over, the other team wins. I said to myself, you know what? Why don't you just start him early so we have time to catch up? And with option number 3, you got the DH in the second inning.
Right.
with this option 3. So I kind of like it from that perspective. But I think out of all of these options, JP, I like number 1. I like number 1 because empower the manager to decide whether the DH is in effect game by game basis. I like that because sometimes if you're an American League team like the New York Yankees or the Chicago White Sox, it'd be kind of cool to see a manager kind of throw a curveball thinking everyone's expecting a DH, and he's like, no, I want my pitcher just to throw a curveball there. Or, but at the same time, if you remember the Yankees back, I think it was 2007, Ching-Ming Wang rounding the bases, and he did something, I think, to his ankle or knee. I forgot which injury that was, and Blaine, you know what? I like the pitchers being involved at all times, not part-time. And I like a compromise like these three options, JP. These are really good options. And you can find his article. I'll post it. Actually, it's already posted down in the Facebook group. You can read that. Now, JP, let's talk about 2020 real quick before we let you go. The Mets, we talked about it before, could benefit from this DH with Cano and Cespedes. And you know what this reminds me of? And as Mets fans are watching it reminds me about the late 90s when interleague play was first introduced. And I remember the Mets, Bobby Valentine, changing up the strategy of Ricky Henderson leading off and Roger Cedeno taking the DH spot on the bottom of the lineup. And that speed benefited them just to get to Mike Piazza. And I think the Mets can get back to that. Excuse me. Where they can put defense on the field with Robinson Cano with his thigh issues and hamstrings, and Cespedes hopefully doesn't encounter a wild boar during these 80 games this year. I think that they can really benefit, but long term, I just don't want to see the pitcher not hitting go away. And I think that's really what I like to see. You thinking the same thing? Just never go away?
Well, I think the thing that I would miss the most is not looking backwards, but really just looking forwards. Again, thinking about the Brendan McKays, the Shohei Ohtanis, the Michael Lorenzens of the world, and just how special it is that we know that these guys can do both. And I think it's the same thing that kept the DH out of the National League, that kept the two-way players out of baseball for as long as they were, which is just tradition, orthodoxy. Guys saying, no, we can't do it because we've never done it. So, no, we're not going to do it. We're not going to try it. And this just gives one less avenue for those players to be revealed for the special talents that they are. I'm going to miss strategy. I think, again, like I said, you introduce the DH to the National League, and it's just one less layer of strategy. It makes it it dumbs the game down a little bit. Now, there are people out there who say, yes, okay, but for every one Bartolo Colon home run, you have to put up with this other 1,000 career at-bats in which he didn't hit a home run, or however many it was. And look, if those 1, 2, or 3 pitcher at-bats per game are just so ugly to you that you would rather see the DH in the National League, that's fine. That's a personal preference and aesthetic choice that I'm not going to argue with if that's the kind of baseball you want. To me, I'm holding in one hand the things that we gain. We gain the ability for guys like Cespedes and Cano to potentially end their career by not having to play defense every day. And that's good. That's a good thing. I'm for that. So on the other hand, we lose this element of strategy from a game that probably could use some more strategy to attract a casual fan. I don't know how to balance that. But that's again why I just think there should be a compromise, because I can see both sides, and I think we can do better than the all or nothing solution that seems to be on the table now.
Yeah, I think one last point, JP, is that one thing we really didn't delve in on is the retaliation, the quote-unquote retaliation part. Remember Roger Clemens in the AL? He wasn't batting. And then it took till 2002 for Sean Estes to only just miss him. I'm going to miss that, even though I'm not trying to provoke violence or any kind of, trying to get players mowed down and hurt. But that part, from a spectator standpoint, the drama behind that, he's going to be hitting next inning. Watch out, or the Mets are or the Cardinals or whoever, are they going to have retribution? That part, if the pitcher not pitching goes away, I don't know. I don't know what would happen. I mean, we could look at the AL and how they handle it, but it's kind of like in hockey. The enforcer. There's a code there that you just don't cross. Line you don't cross. But I'm just wondering if you take out the pitchers completely in both leagues hitting, would baseball bench clearing brawl spike because of it?
Yeah, I think the beauty of it is that because there's one league that's been operating with the DH since 1973 already, we can go back and look. Like, I don't know who keeps stats on bench clearing brawls. Maybe hockeyfights.com needs to branch out in that area. But we can see if there are more in the American League or the National League. There's an answer to that question. But, I mean, to your point about enforcers, how many true enforcers are there anymore? That's something that might go away in time, with or without the DH. I don't know. But
yeah. Well, we do.
We'll never know, I guess. Right?
Yeah. Well, we do live in a world of analytics. I'm sure somebody out there on the internet has that stat for us.
That's right.
But JP, thank you so much for coming on to the Let's Go Mets podcast, and you have stay safe and so say hello to the family for me.
Thank you, Sam. Keep your mask on.
Great, thank you. That is J.P. Hoornstra out in L.A. coming on to the Let's Go Mets podcast. Don't hold it against him. He covers the Dodgers. He's a great guy. Wow, that was great. So, music is on. Well, DH or not the DH? Please tell us your opinion, comments. You find us at Let's Go Mets Pod on Twitter, Periscope. You find us on Facebook, Let's Go Mets Podcast, YouTube Live, and Twitch. Until next time, Mets fans, let's go Mets!